Several years ago, after I finally started to generate enough income that I could begin to collect Transformers from the Classics line, which had already existed for several years, one of my first purchases was of a combo pack of Transformers Classics Deluxe Class Grimlock and Transformers Classics Voyager Class Jetfire. Grimlock and Jetfire were two of my favorite characters from the original series, and I thought it would be a great place to start my new collection. However, when I first opened that 2-pack, which I already considered too good to be true, I was a bit disappointed. Grimlock, while interesting in concept and design, was a huge departure from the original's aesthetic in terms of design and size. He was far too small. And while I didn't dislike him per se, I didn't particularly find myself satisfied with him either. I did, though, like Jetfire more. I found him an interesting happy medium between the American aesthetic that made its way into the character model on the show and the Japanese aesthetic, which came from his status as a simple repackaging of an old Macross toy. It was an interesting figure, but it wasn't particularly fun. The joints were loose immediately out of the box. Certain pieces didn't stay in place, and his armor components were just far too large. Not only that, but his helmet made his head far too large, proportionate to his body, while his head without the helmet was just far too small. He was an interesting figure, rife with problems. Then, just recently, I heard about Hasbro's plan to release a Leader Class Generations Jetfire, and I was ecstatic. Though it soon turned out that my excitement over that particular figure was bound to go the same way as my excitement over the fact that we were getting a Leader Class movie Grimlock, because they did the exact same thing. They added chrome where it shouldn't have been. All of his armor components and weapons were cast in red chrome with no color to pick out any of the details. Not only that, but the body just felt really whitewashed, like there were details there that should have been picked out and yet weren't. It was a very dissatisfactory figure. Again. And while I liked the general design of it, I couldn't bring myself to purchase it. I have talked many times on this review show about my feelings towards gratuitous chrome. And I really hope that Hasbro gets the message after releasing Leader Class Transformers movie Optimus Prime and Leader Class Transformers movie Grimlock, as well as the Hasbro version of this figure, that we only want chrome where it's applicable. Still, I had one hope left, the Takara version of the figure. I know it seems counterintuitive to assume that Takara will include less chrome on their figures, especially figures that are part of this line, which is essentially an evolution of the old Hencake line, which, as we know, had a lot of gratuitous chrome. But still, it was my last shot. So I waited. I waited to see the Takara version of the figure, and I was not disappointed. This figure looked amazing. It was everything that I wanted the Hasbro figure to be. So while I have also talked several times on this review show about the fact that I prefer to buy local Transformers because they're affordable on a budget, I shelled out an additional $45-ish to buy this figure from overseas. And while my wallet is still suffering a bit, I could not be happier. This figure is beautiful, it's brilliant, it's a fantastic update to a classic. While I don't have G1 Jetfire, I can point you in the direction of a fantastic comparison. Check out Optibotimus's review of this figure, which is found at the link here. Not only does he compare it to the G1 figure, but he also compares it to the Hasbro version of this figure. It's really a fantastic review by a fantastic reviewer. Me, I just want to talk about this figure, because as far as I'm concerned, this is the best figure to come out so far in the Generations line, aside from possibly Generations RC. So while my initial plan was to release a review of Deluxe Class Chromia today, we are instead going to focus on this guy. You see him here in his robot mode, but as per usual, I'm going to start the review off properly by getting him transformed up into his vehicle mode through the magic of jump cuts. And here we have Jetfire in his vehicle mode with his armor and weapons removed. True to his Macross roots, Jetfire is effectively just an existing jet with additional armor and weapon components as well as transformation parts. In this case, he's an F-14 Tomcat, my personal favorite fighter jet, which just adds to my satisfaction with this figure. Jetfire comes with deployable landing gear underneath the cockpit, as well as a cockpit which opens and reveals little seats inside. This additional touch makes this figure feel a lot more like a Masterpiece figure than a Generations figure, and I absolutely love it. As you can see, his armor components are quite numerous, more so than they were on the original Classics or Henkai version of the toy. And I really like them. They're smaller, and for example, the arm bits here are smaller than the ones we saw on the overall smaller Classics figure. And so it doesn't matter that they're more numerous, they still fit with the figure more proportionately. My favorite piece is his booster rocket backpack thingy, the name of which I don't really know, which has the best detailing and of course the largest size. We can see separate black rocket pieces here and separate black air intake vents on the front. On the Hasbro version of this figure, all of the black on all of these armor and weapon components were also red chrome. And it just looked bad. Now, not horrible, but bad. To armor up Jetfire, what we're going to do first, otherwise I'll forget, is we are going to take his face mask and just plug it onto his gun, like so. That is its storage. And while I don't particularly like it, I will admit it's effective enough. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take these longer gun pieces, and we're just going to slot them onto his legs, well, what will be his legs, over top of his rear landing gear. And we will do the same thing, of course, on both sides. Next, we're going to come to these holes here, and we're going to slot his smaller guns onto them. Finally, we're going to come up top, fold these down, and we're just going to tab these in like so. And then come up front and plug his weapon under the nose, like so. And here we have Jetfire, all armored up. And I like it mostly. And now I like it completely, because this plugging into the nose of a jet is just dumb. But we'll talk about that more later. In this mode, Jetfire doesn't look all that different than he does in his standard vehicle mode. I mean, clearly he has booster rockets on his back, but the armor components underneath are really no more obtrusive than any of the extra components already there. And overall, I think it actually serves to help fill out the shape of the figure. It's just a very nice plane, made even nicer by the fact that its wings actually deploy. It has a great weight to it. The plastic feels fantastic. All of it is just top-notch, except that the cockpit keeps popping open. This is the figure that I've wanted from the Generations line. This is the figure that proves that the Generations line has come so far from the Classics line that there's no going back at this point. While I really appreciate what Classics tried to do with reinventing the looks of the characters just as much as recreating the characters, they took it too far in many different occasions. This figure proves that the Generations line is almost better off sticking to less obvious departures. And I'm struggling to explain this because I don't even quite know how to put it into words. But this figure, it finds that happy medium between being an homage to the original toy and being an homage to the original character design. And at the same time, it's something almost entirely new. And I absolutely love it for that. And that's something that the old Classics figures always tried to do, but they always seemed to just take it one step too far or not far enough. In other words, I could not be happier with this toy. I just love it. In terms of detail, Jetfire has fantastic painted machine guns on his nose cone, as well as these fantastic painted stripes all across the figure. On his underside, on his admittedly robot-like parts, he has a lot more red paint, which looks very, very nice. And inside his false cockpit, which we will get a better look at in his robot mode, you can see a fantastic red Autobot symbol. The molding on the figure is top-notch, really doing a good job of invoking the metal panels that you would find on an actual jet. Overall, in terms of the look of the figure, I would say it's about as close to perfect as I would have ever expected. To transform Jetfire, we're going to start off up here on the top of the jet. We're going to, well, fold up his landing gear, which I'll admit isn't on the top, but it's close enough. Next, we're going to take these panels, which are sometimes a bit difficult to get a grip on, and we're just going to lift them up like so. Next, we're going to separate the nose cone and bring it up about that far, for at least right now. Next, we're going to come underneath the figure, and we are going to loosen up this forward section until it pops out like so on this hinge. Next, raising the camera up a bit, we're going to come back to this back section and untab his legs from the bottoms of the wings, and we are going to begin to rotate them out of the way like so, which will give us a little more clearance to pop these shoulder bits loose of these black tabs underneath the thrusters, which will in turn free up this entire section to be brought out and then accordioned down. You can see a black hinge right there. It will rotate down on that black hinge just about an inch or so, which will allow us to bring the nose cone up, back around the other side. We're going to take these sections, we are going to bring them down, and then making sure that his wings are folded in as far as they will go. You can see a slot there on the underside of the wing. The shoulder section will just slot into that on both sides. Next, we are going to bring his legs down the rest of the way, and we're going to rotate them forward, and then bring them around like so, which will tab them in to both sides of this panel here. Next, we'll bring this up, fold these panels in. Let's go ahead and rotate his arms into place as well. And then we will just bring this section up, and you can see it will tab in here on his pelvis area, as well as with just a little bit of applied pressure, it will slide in, and then the shoulders will tab into the sides of his torso. Finally, we are going to come down here, and we are going to fold out his feet, which have quite long heels, and then we are going to rotate his head around. And there we have the Takara version of Transformers Generations Leader Class Jetfire, the LG-07 Leader Class Jetfire, in his robot mode. The LG-07 looks absolutely magnificent. Its size, its proportions, its stature, all of them are very satisfactory, whereas the proportions, the size, and the stature of the original Classics Jetfire were only so-so. Not only that, but all of the parts of this figure hold together magnificently. The only section I have any issue with at all is this pelvis section, which sometimes pops back out enough during transformation that it doesn't quite tap in entirely, which is an easy fix, as you saw right there. Overall, this figure looks great without his battle mask, which we saw here. Bringing the camera up and in, let's take a look at his absolutely magnificent head sculpt, which has some decent light piping, though not quite good enough that I feel the need to show it off here. Bringing the camera down, we can see the Autobot now appear on his chest. You can see the white here on his legs is broken up magnificently by these few black paint applications, and these red paint applications across his ankles, none of which were there on the American release of the toy. Being a version of Jetfire, the toy of course has a backpack, and while it's quite large, it doesn't hamper the stability of the figure at all. And from the front, at least, I think it looks perfectly fine, and actually adds to how dynamic I think the figure appears. He looks like some kind of rocket man who could shoot into the air at any moment under the power of these rockets mounted on his back, which do, of course, rotate around so that they point down at the ground. Even if it does, well, let's just say, add a bit to his height. In terms of his articulation, Jetfire is actually pretty dang impressive. His head is on a double joint, which allows it to look far up, look a bit down, and do the full 360-degree exorcist twist. He can raise his arms at the shoulder, and he can rotate his arms 180 degrees, because he does have wings sitting in the way. His arms rotate above the elbow, and his elbow is very nicely ratcheted. His hips are also very nicely ratcheted, and are hindered in a very similar way to the arms, as they are also blocked by the backpack. They do move fairly far forward, and they do rotate above the knee at the hip. The knees themselves are on a soft ratchet and bend far further than 90 degrees. All of the slots for his armor, as well as the holes in his hands, are the standard 5mm ports, so he can hold his gun, and pretty much any other gun released with any modern Transformers. And of course, his battle mask can attach to the front of the head, and attaches quite well, adding a whole new look to the figure, one which I quite like, though I'll admit that this might not be for everyone. For a size comparison here, we have him next to Generations Combiner Wars Optimus Prime, as well as his old Classics counterpart. And, well, we'll get to this guy in a minute. Let's just put him over here. Next to Optimus Prime, Jetfire looks great. I talked a lot in my versus review of Combiner Wars Optimus Prime and Classics Optimus Prime that I just really love the look of this Optimus Prime figure, but that it's not a perfect Optimus Prime. I really love the look of this Jetfire figure. It is a perfect Jetfire. And I think this is a pretty good scale between the two. Jetfire was always one of the largest Autobots. And, well, I'm not going to show the size comparison here because I feel like I've already done enough. I feel like this scale works better than Classics Optimus Prime to Jetfire. But as I promised, let's talk for a minute about Classics Jetfire. Here we have these two iterations of this character side by side, and I think you can see what I was talking about. Classics Jetfire has a really interesting aesthetic to him, but he doesn't look like a humanoid robot, so much as he looks like a bunch of pieces trying to be a humanoid robot. LG-07 Jetfire, he looks like what you would have expected one of the character models on the show to look like. He was clearly a machine, but he had these humanoid proportions. And I think the aesthetic differences here speak for themselves more than anything, and it's why I'm fumbling over my words here. The new generation's Jetfire is just a superior figure. It's taller. Its proportions are more accurate. It has smaller pieces of kibble. The only two things that I feel that the Classics Jetfire did better is the storage for the helmet was better in vehicle mode, and the gun itself stored better in vehicle mode, as it did split in half and attach to the sides of the figure rather than just sitting on the nose all precarious-like. Still, those few bonuses don't change the fact that this just wasn't a satisfactory Jetfire figure. And don't get me wrong, I don't dislike Classics Jetfire. It just had serious problems. Problems which only get more glaring over time as the figure wears down. This figure has far fewer problems right out of the box. I feel like it'll last a lot longer. And really, as a collector, that's all I can hope for. I want my figures to last as long as possible. And it's for these reasons that I didn't do a versus review of these two guys, because, quite honestly, Generations Jetfire is, hands down, the superior figure. He's more dynamic, he's taller, he has better paint, his transformation's better, he's more solid, he's a great figure. And that's why it hurts me, physically, to say that I can't recommend picking up this figure. And I need to explain this because it's kind of counter to everything I just said. But this figure cost me $90 almost. That's a lot of money. Between the actual cost of the figure and shipping, it was almost too much. I did pick this figure up from BigBadToyStore.com, and I've had some good experiences with them in the past. They're a good company. But they have to charge extra money for imported toys just like any other website. And so I can't recommend that you pick this up. I will say if you have the money to do it and you want the figure, go for it. That's great. Overall, I just feel that it has to be your decision whether or not you get it. But guys, that's really it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it because I certainly enjoyed making it. It was a little different than some of my past reviews, a little more scripted, though perhaps not successfully, so we'll make that determination a little bit later and see if it changes the way I approach these things. But until then, this has been Awesome John 22, and I will talk to you guys later.